Rain struck the towering windows of Ashford Manor with the relentless rhythm of thrown pebbles, while thunder rolled beyond the distant hills like the growl of some ancient beast awakening in the dark. The great house stood illuminated against the storm, its countless windows glowing amber through sheets of rain, a monument to privilege, lineage, and appearances. Yet within those stone walls, where crystal chandeliers scattered golden light across polished marble floors, a far quieter tempest was gathering. Duchess Eleanor Ashford moved through the manor's grand corridor with measured grace, one gloved hand resting lightly against her abdomen. She was 24 years old, beautiful in the restrained manner admired by Victorian society, with soft chestnut hair arranged beneath a modest evening coiffure and eyes that carried an enduring gentleness no hardship had managed to extinguish. Tonight, however, her composure concealed a fragile excitement she scarcely dared believe was real. Clutched carefully within her hand was a slender object wrapped in silk. Only an hour earlier, London's most respected physician had confirmed what her heart had scarcely allowed itself to hope. After 2 years of marriage, she was carrying a child. A child. The word seemed almost sacred. For months she had endured the silent loneliness of her position. Though she possessed one of England's most distinguished titles, she often felt less like a wife than a carefully arranged piece of furniture within her husband's vast estate. The Duke of Ashford was admired throughout society for his discipline, intelligence, and commanding presence. Yet Sebastian Ashford remained an enigma even to the woman who shared his name. He spent much of the year traveling between estates, attending Parliament, overseeing investments, and fulfilling obligations that seemed endless. Their marriage had been born of duty rather than affection, and while he had never treated Eleanor with cruelty, neither had he granted her the intimacy she quietly longed for. Still, she loved him. The realization embarrassed her sometimes. It felt foolish to love a man who remained so distant. Yet she treasured every rare smile, every brief conversation beside a fireplace, every moment when the severe mask of the Duke slipped and revealed something warmer beneath. Tonight she believed everything might change. As she approached the carved oak doors of Sebastian's private study, her pulse quickened. He had returned unexpectedly from Scotland only hours earlier after months away. The entire household buzzed with preparations for his arrival, yet Eleanor had remained patient, waiting for the right moment. This was that moment. She raised her hand and knocked softly. A deep voice answered, "Enter." The study glowed with firelight. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, while maps and documents covered a vast mahogany desk. Several senior servants stood nearby awaiting instructions. Sebastian himself occupied the center of the room like a figure carved from granite. Tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in black evening attire, he possessed the kind of commanding presence that silenced conversations upon entering a room. Dark hair framed a striking face sharpened by intelligence and self-control. His reputation for decisive judgment had made him one of the most respected noblemen in England. When his gaze lifted to Eleanor, something flickered briefly in his eyes before disappearing. "Your Grace," she said softly. "Eleanor." The formal exchange carried the familiar distance that always existed between them. She stepped forward. "I wish to speak with you privately." Before Sebastian could answer, a clerk handed him another document requiring signature. Irritation flashed across his features. Must it be now? The question struck harder than intended. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the silk-wrapped object. "Yes," she replied quietly. "I believe it must." Something in her voice caused him to dismiss the clerk with a gesture. The servants remained, organizing papers near the desk, but the room grew slightly less crowded. Sebastian looked at her expectantly. For a moment words failed. The dream she had rehearsed countless times suddenly seemed absurdly difficult to express. Then she extended the small bundle toward him. "I received news today," she said. His eyes narrowed. He took the object and unfolded the silk. Silence followed. A long, terrible silence. The physician's testing stick rested in his hand. Eleanor saw confusion first, then calculation, then something infinitely worse. The atmosphere shifted so suddenly it felt as though the fire itself had gone cold. Sebastian stared at the object. His jaw tightened. Color drained from Eleanor's face as she watched realization transform into suspicion. "You are with child?" he said. A smile trembled at her lips. "Yes." The smile vanished when she heard his next breath. Slow, sure, dangerously controlled. The Duke's gaze rose to meet hers. Months of absence seemed to stand between them like an uncrossable sea. Every journey, every week apart, every lonely evening, every unanswered letter. The arithmetic was unfolding behind his eyes. "No," Eleanor whispered. He set the object down with deliberate precision. "No," he repeated. "You misunderstand." "Do I?" The servants had frozen. No one moved. No one breathed. Thunder cracked against the manor. Sebastian stepped forward. The hurt in his expression somehow wounded more deeply than anger. "Is this my child?" he demanded. Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. "Sebastian, answer me." His voice rose. Years of discipline shattered beneath betrayal he believed was unfolding before him. "Is this my child? Answer me or get out." The words struck like a physical blow. Every servant heard them. Every witness lowered their eyes. Eleanor felt humiliation sweep through her body with devastating force. Not because strangers had heard. Because he believed it. The man she loved truly believed she had betrayed him. For several unbearable seconds neither spoke. Rain battered the windows. Firelight flickered. The future she had imagined crumbled silently around her. At last, Eleanor lifted her chin. Tears threatened, but dignity remained. Without defending herself, without pleading, she turned and walked toward the door. Behind her, Sebastian remained motionless beside the desk, imprisoned by his certainty. The servants parted as she passed. Only the elderly housekeeper, Mrs. Whitmore, dared meet her gaze. There, hidden beneath the older woman's shock, Eleanor noticed something unexpected, concern mixed with recognition. As the Duchess disappeared into the corridor, Mrs. Whitmore's hand drifted instinctively toward a sealed letter concealed inside her apron pocket, and her expression suggested she had just realized the contents might change everything. Morning arrived beneath a sky the color of tarnished silver, and Ashford Manor seemed transformed by the events of the previous night. The vast corridors remained as elegant as ever, the polished floors reflecting soft winter light, the portraits of long-dead ancestors watching silently from gilded frames, yet an invisible fracture had spread through the household. Servants spoke in hushed voices. Footsteps softened. Doors closed with unusual care. The accusation uttered by the Duke had traveled through the manor like a crack through glass. Eleanor spent the morning alone in her private sitting room overlooking the frost-covered gardens. A fire burned steadily within the marble hearth, but little warmth reached her. She sat beside the window wrapped in a pale blue shawl, her gaze fixed upon the sleeping landscape beyond. Snow dusted the hedges and statues, turning the grounds into a scene of deceptive serenity. Nothing outside reflected the turmoil within her heart. She had spent the entire night replaying the moment. Not his anger. Not his raised voice. But the certainty. Sebastian had not questioned her as a husband seeking understanding. He had judged her as a man convinced of guilt. That wound cut deepest. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she said quietly. The door opened to reveal Mrs. Whitmore. The elderly housekeeper had served the Ashford family for nearly 40 years. Time had silvered her hair and bent her posture slightly, yet her eyes remained sharp and observant. Few people understood the manor's history better than she did. In her hands rested a sealed envelope. "Your Grace," she said softly, "I believe this belongs to you." Eleanor accepted the letter with faint confusion. The seal bore the insignia of a London medical practice. She opened it carefully. As her eyes moved across the contents, surprise gradually replaced bewilderment. The letter detailed arrangements made several months earlier for her medical care following a severe illness. Payment had been made in advance. Transportation had been organized. Specialists had been retained should her condition worsen. Every instruction carried the same signature. Sebastian Ashford. Eleanor read the document twice. Then a third time. The memory returned slowly. Months earlier she had suffered a dangerous fever while the Duke was believed to be traveling in Scotland. During her recovery, anonymous assistants had appeared without explanation. She had assumed the arrangements were merely routine obligations fulfilled by estate management. Now she understood otherwise. He had personally ensured her treatment. "He never told me," she whispered. Mrs. Whitmore's expression softened. Some gentlemen find concern easier to express through actions than words. Eleanor folded the letter carefully. The discovery did not erase the accusation. Yet it complicated it. For the first time since the confrontation, doubt entered her certainty that Sebastian felt nothing for her at all. Elsewhere within the manor, the Duke sat alone in his study. The storm had passed, but unrest lingered. Documents covered his desk. Correspondence demanded attention. Estate matters required decisions. Still, concentration eluded him. His gaze repeatedly drifted toward the empty fireplace, toward memory, toward questions he preferred not to examine. A discreet knock interrupted his thoughts. One of the footmen entered carrying the morning newspapers. "Thank you." The servant hesitated. "Is there something else?" The footman lowered his eyes. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I thought it best you know that certain reports are already circulating in London." A chill settled over the room. What reports? The hesitation itself supplied the answer. By afternoon, whispers had escaped the manor. By evening, they had reached the capital. Victorian society possessed an endless appetite for scandal, particularly when noble families were involved. In elegant drawing rooms illuminated by candlelight, aristocratic ladies exchanged rumors over tea. Gentlemen discussed the matter within exclusive clubs. Speculation traveled from carriage to ballroom with astonishing speed. The Duke suspected his pregnant wife of infidelity. The story spread like wildfire. With every retelling, details grew more dramatic. Some claimed witnesses had observed a violent confrontation. Others insisted the marriage itself was collapsing. By the following day, Eleanor's dignity had become entertainment for strangers. The humiliation reached her through subtle changes. Invitations quietly disappeared. Letters went unanswered. Even sympathetic acquaintances seemed uncertain how to address the scandal. Yet she endured it with remarkable grace. If society wished to judge her, she would not assist its cruelty by surrendering her composure. 3 days later, another surprise arrived. A small package awaited her upon the breakfast table. No sender's name accompanied it. No explanation. Only her title written in elegant handwriting. Curiosity overcame caution. She untied the ribbon. Inside rested an antique sapphire locket. The jewel caught the morning sunlight and scattered blue reflections across the tablecloth. It was exquisite, clearly valuable, yet its true significance emerged only when she opened it. Her breath caught. Within the locket rested a miniature portrait of her late mother. The likeness was unmistakable. Every delicate feature had been captured perfectly. For a moment Eleanor could do nothing except stare. Her mother had died years earlier. Few surviving portraits existed. Hands trembling slightly, she discovered a folded note hidden beneath the miniature. The message contained only 6 words. Some truths wait patiently to be believed. Nothing more. No signature. No explanation. Only those words. The gift unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Someone knew her history. Someone possessed access to a portrait believed lost. Most troubling of all, someone seemed aware of the accusation threatening to destroy her reputation. Meanwhile, Sebastian found himself increasingly haunted by inconsistency. Servants who had known Eleanor for years spoke of her kindness with unwavering loyalty. Estate workers defended her character without hesitation. Even individuals with little affection for the Duchess struggled to imagine deception from a woman so consistently honorable. Their confidence irritated him, then disturbed him, then slowly began eroding his own. One evening he paused outside the servants' corridor and overheard a conversation not intended for noble ears. She would never do such a thing, a maid insisted. Not her grace, another agreed. The certainty in their voices lingered long after he walked away. For the first time, conviction gave way to uncertainty. And uncertainty proved far more dangerous. Late the next afternoon, a carriage rolled through the manor gates beneath a sky heavy with snow. The visitor emerged wearing a dark overcoat and carrying a leather case. His expression was grave. His purpose appeared urgent. When the butler announced him, both Eleanor and Sebastian happened to be within hearing distance. The name that followed silenced the room. It was the physician who had confirmed Eleanor's pregnancy. And according to his message, he possessed information concerning the child that neither husband nor wife had yet been told. Silence settled over Ashford Manor after the physician's arrival, the kind of silence that seemed to draw every breath from the corridors and hold it captive. Snow drifted steadily beyond the tall windows, whitening the grounds until earth and sky appeared stitched together by winter itself. Inside the drawing room, however, the atmosphere was far colder than the landscape beyond. Eleanor sat near the hearth, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The sapphire locket rested against her throat, hidden beneath the high collar of her gown. Across from her stood Sebastian, rigid as a soldier awaiting judgment. Neither looked directly at the other. The physician placed his leather case upon a side table. "I understand this matter is deeply personal," he said carefully. "Nevertheless, I believe certain facts require clarification." Sebastian nodded curtly. "Proceed." The physician withdrew several documents. These records concern the Duchess's pregnancy and the estimated date of conception. A shadow crossed Sebastian's face. The physician continued. "Based upon my examination, the child was conceived during a very specific period approximately 4 months ago." The room grew still. Eleanor watched the physician calmly. Sebastian watched him with increasing tension. "There is no uncertainty regarding the timeline," the doctor said. "The child could not have been conceived recently. Nor could the date vary significantly." Sebastian frowned. "That proves nothing." On the contrary, your grace, it proves a great deal. The physician unfolded another paper. According to travel records supplied by your estate manager, you returned briefly to Ashford Manor during the winter storm of December 9th. Sebastian's expression changed. Only slightly. Yet Eleanor noticed. I was here for less than a day, he replied. Nevertheless, you were here. The physician placed the records before him. The Duke stared down at the dates. Something distant stirred behind his eyes. A memory. Faint. Incomplete. Like a candle flickering behind thick fog. After the physician departed, neither husband nor wife spoke immediately. The revelation lingered between them. At last Sebastian excused himself and retreated to his study. There, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence, he attempted to dismiss the matter through logic. It was how he had solved every challenge throughout his life. Facts, records, order. Yet memory refused to obey reason. Again and again his thoughts returned to that winter night. The storm, the cold, the journey. Gradually, fragments emerged. He remembered arriving long after midnight. Snow had buried the roads. His carriage had nearly overturned. By the time he reached Ashford Manor, fever already burned through his body. He remembered stumbling through the entrance hall. Remembered servants rushing forward. Remembered refusing medical attention. Then another image surfaced. Eleanor, waiting at the top of the staircase. Concern visible in her eyes. The memory sharpened. He remembered her helping him to his chambers. Remembered her cool hand against his forehead. Remembered her voice speaking softly while the storm raged outside. 4 years Sebastian had trained himself to value duty above emotion. He organized his life with military precision. Affection complicated judgment. Vulnerability invited disappointment. Yet that night had been different. Fever stripped away defenses. The past returned with startling clarity. Hours passed. The storm intensified. Physicians could not reach the estate. Servants came and went. Only Eleanor remained. She sat beside his bed while candles burned low. She brought water. Medicine. Fresh cloths cooled his fevered skin. Not because obligation demanded it. Because she cared. Sebastian remembered awakening briefly near dawn. The fire had faded into glowing embers. Snow pressed against the windows. Eleanor sat sleeping in a chair beside him, exhausted from keeping watch throughout the night. The sight had affected him more deeply than he admitted. Even then, especially then, another memory surfaced, the strongest of all. He remembered reaching for her hand. Remembered her waking. Remembered speaking honestly for perhaps the first time since their marriage. No titles. No formalities. No distance. Only two lonely people sharing the quiet hours before sunrise. The recollection struck with devastating force. Because it had not ended there. By morning, something fragile and beautiful had existed between them. Something neither had ever spoken of afterward. Something he had buried beneath responsibilities and obligations. The realization left him motionless. The child. The possibility became certainty. Not merely possible. Inevitable. His accusation echoed through his mind with unbearable clarity. Is this my child? The question now felt monstrous. Not because he had doubted. Because he had forgotten. He had forgotten the single night that mattered most. Meanwhile, Eleanor sought refuge within the manor conservatory. Glass walls surrounded a sanctuary of winter roses and evergreen vines. Pale sunlight filtered through the ceiling, illuminating delicate blossoms that somehow survived despite the season. She often came there when emotions became difficult to contain. Today was no exception. The scandal still followed her. The whispers still existed. Yet exhaustion had replaced anger. She stood beside a cluster of white roses when footsteps approached behind her. She knew who it was before turning. Sebastian. For several moments neither spoke. The silence felt different now. Not hostile. Heavy. Fragile. I remember, he said quietly. Eleanor remained still. The words alone carried tremendous weight. His gaze lowered briefly. I remember the storm. Something flickered across her face. Pain. Relief. Bitterness. Hope. Perhaps all at once. The physician helped, he continued. But the memories were already returning. She looked away. Outside the glass walls, snow drifted lazily through the afternoon light. You remembered eventually, she said. The simplicity of the statement wounded him. Eventually. After humiliation. After accusations. After public scandal. Eventually. Sebastian stepped closer. For the first time in years, uncertainty touched his voice. I owe you an apology. Eleanor laughed softly. The sound contained no amusement. An apology? His expression tightened. I was wrong. You believed I betrayed you. The words landed with quiet force. He could not deny them. I know. She faced him fully now. The composure she had maintained for days finally cracked. Not through tears. Through honesty. Do you understand what it felt like? She asked. To bring you the happiest news of my life and watch you look at me as though I were a stranger? Every word struck true. Sebastian found no defense. None existed. I remembered every estate account, he said quietly. Every contract. Every debt. Every obligation entrusted to me. His voice faltered. Yet I forgot the single night that mattered most. The confession hung between them. For a moment neither moved. The conservatory seemed suspended outside time itself. Then Eleanor's shoulders softened slightly. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something less absolute than despair. Something capable of growing. Sebastian noticed it immediately. And for the first time since the accusation, genuine hope appeared. It lasted only seconds. Without warning, Eleanor's face lost color. Her hand flew toward a nearby table. The room tilted around her. Eleanor. She attempted to answer but failed. The weeks of stress, grief, and emotional strain finally demanded payment. Her knees buckled. The world vanished beneath her feet. And just before she struck the marble floor, Sebastian lunged forward and caught her in his arms. The moment Eleanor collapsed, the world seemed to narrow around Sebastian Ashford. Nothing remained except the woman in his arms and the terror that seized his heart with ruthless precision. The conservatory vanished. The winter roses vanished. Even the shame that had haunted him for days disappeared beneath a single overwhelming fear. He might lose her. Eleanor. Her name escaped him with a desperation no title could conceal. Her eyelids fluttered weakly. Relief struck him so sharply that he nearly staggered. Within minutes, servants rushed to assist. The household physician was summoned. Doors opened. Footsteps echoed through corridors. Yet throughout the commotion, Sebastian never released her hand. The Duchess was carried carefully to her chambers overlooking the eastern gardens. There, beneath embroidered blankets and soft candlelight, she was examined while Sebastian paced the room like a man awaiting sentence. The physician finally emerged. She is exhausted, Your Grace. Sebastian stopped immediately. The child? For the moment, both mother and child appear safe. The Duke closed his eyes. Only then did he realize he had scarcely breathed. The physician regarded him carefully. However, Her Grace requires peace. The strain of recent events has affected her greatly. Recent events. The phrase carried more accusation than any direct criticism. Sebastian accepted it without protest. After the physician departed, he remained outside Eleanor's chamber for several minutes before entering quietly. The room glowed with the warm light of several lamps. Snow drifted beyond the windows. Eleanor slept peacefully for the first time in days. Sebastian approached the bedside. How many times had he overlooked her? How many opportunities had he wasted? She looked younger while sleeping. More vulnerable. More human. Not a duchess. Not an obligation. Not a symbol of his title. Simply Eleanor. The woman who had cared for him through fever. The woman he had wounded. The woman carrying his child. He lowered himself into a nearby chair. Then he stayed. Hours passed. Night deepened. The household retired. Still Sebastian remained. When Eleanor woke shortly after midnight, she found him seated beside her bed. Surprise flickered across her face. You should be resting, she murmured. His expression softened. So should you. Neither spoke further. Yet the silence no longer felt cold. It felt shared. Over the following days, a quiet transformation unfolded throughout Ashford Manor. For the first time since their marriage, Sebastian reorganized his schedule entirely around another person's well-being. Meetings were postponed. Travel plans were cancelled. Estate matters were delegated. Each morning he personally inquired about Eleanor's health. Each evening he sat beside her fire and read aloud from novels or newspapers. The gestures remained small. Yet they carried a sincerity impossible to ignore. Eleanor noticed everyone. So did the servants. The change spread through the household like sunlight after a long winter. Still, one task remained unfinished. The scandal. No amount of private kindness could erase a public humiliation. Sebastian understood this better than anyone. The accusation had been spoken before witnesses. The correction required the same courage. 2 weeks later, Ashford Manor hosted a winter gathering attended by influential members of London's aristocracy. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the grand ballroom. Music drifted through the air. Elegant gowns shimmered beneath candlelight. Conversations flowed gracefully from one cluster of guests to another. Yet beneath the sophistication lingered curiosity. Everyone knew the rumors. Everyone watched the Duke and Duchess. Sebastian had anticipated exactly that. As the evening reached its height, he stepped forward and requested silence. Gradually, conversations faded. Musicians lowered their instruments. Hundreds of eyes turned toward him. Eleanor stood nearby, uncertain of his intentions. For a brief moment, Sebastian experienced something unfamiliar. Nervousness. Not fear of public speaking. Fear of failing her again. Then he began. "Ladies and gentlemen." His voice carried effortlessly through the ballroom. "I have spent much of my life believing certainty was a virtue." The crowd listened carefully. "Recently, that certainty caused me to commit a profound injustice." A murmur moved through the audience. Sebastian ignored it. His gaze never left Eleanor. "I publicly doubted the honor of my wife." Shock rippled across the room. No aristocrat willingly admitted such failure. No duke voluntarily surrendered pride. Yet Sebastian continued. "The fault was entirely mine." The words landed with undeniable force. "The child she carries is my son." Silence followed. Complete silence. Every whisper vanished. Every rumor collapsed beneath truth. Then came the final declaration. "The only shame in this room belongs to the man who doubted his wife." No one spoke. No one dared. For perhaps the first time in his life, Sebastian felt the weight of humility. And strangely it brought relief. The following morning, newspapers across London carried an entirely different story. The scandal that had threatened Eleanor's reputation began unraveling. Society adored redemption almost as much as disgrace. Invitations returned. Letters arrived. The whispers gradually changed direction. Yet the greatest changes occurred far from public view. One afternoon, Eleanor discovered fresh roses arranged beside her favorite reading chair. The next morning another bouquet appeared. Then another. Each accompanied by no note. No explanation. She knew precisely who sent them. Weeks later she was guided to a previously unused wing of the manor. When the doors opened she stopped in astonishment. A nursery. Sunlight flooded through lace curtains. Handcrafted furniture gleamed softly against pale walls. Intricate carvings decorated every surface. Roses. Her favorite flowers. Each piece had been commissioned specifically for her. Sebastian watched her reaction carefully. "I hope the room might please you." Emotion tightened her throat. "It is beautiful." For the first time, genuine happiness illuminated his face. The sight affected her more deeply than the nursery itself, because it revealed something she had never fully seen before. Not merely regret. Not merely duty. Love beginning to emerge from beneath years of restraint. Winter deepened. Snow covered the grounds. The scandal faded into memory. Trust slowly rebuilt itself through countless quiet moments. Then, on a glittering evening beneath hundreds of chandeliers at the season's most prestigious charity ball, Sebastian did something that instantly silenced the entire ballroom. Without warning, the Duke of Ashford stepped before his wife, lowered himself onto one knee before the assembled nobility, and reached into the inner pocket of his coat as every astonished guest watched in breathless anticipation. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Music had ceased. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead like suspended constellations. Hundreds of guests stood motionless beneath their golden light, their astonishment visible upon every face as Sebastian Ashford, Duke of Ashford, remained kneeling before his wife. No one in the room could remember witnessing such a sight. Powerful men accepted admiration. They accepted obedience. They accepted deference. They did not kneel. Yet Sebastian remained exactly where he was. Not as a duke. Not as a master of vast estates. Not as one of England's most respected noblemen. Simply as a husband. Slowly he withdrew a small velvet box from his coat. Eleanor's heart stumbled. The room disappeared. The guests disappeared. Only Sebastian remained. The man who had wounded her. The man who had fought to earn back every fragment of trust he had broken. The man she had never stopped loving. His gaze never left hers. Months ago she had believed those eyes incapable of revealing vulnerability. Now she understood how mistaken she had been. When he finally spoke, his voice carried throughout the silent ballroom. "I once married you because duty required it." Emotion tightened his features. "Tonight, I ask whether you might allow me to spend the rest of my life deserving you." A collective breath swept through the crowd. Sebastian opened the box. Inside rested a magnificent ring crafted from a sapphire surrounded by diamonds. The central stone glowed with deep blue fire beneath the chandelier light. Eleanor immediately recognized it. The sapphire had belonged to Sebastian's grandmother, a woman legendary within the Ashford family for a marriage founded upon genuine devotion rather than obligation. The heirloom was priceless, not because of its value, because of what it represented. Tears gathered in Eleanor's eyes. Not dramatic tears. Not theatrical tears. The quiet tears of a woman whose heart had endured disappointment, humiliation, hope, and healing. For a long moment she simply looked at him. She remembered the accusation, the heartbreak, the loneliness, but she also remembered every evening he had spent beside her bed, every bouquet of roses, every sincere apology, every effort he had made when walking away would have been easier. People often spoke of forgiveness as a single decision. The truth was far more complicated. Forgiveness was a journey, a bridge built one stone at a time. Sebastian had spent weeks laying those stones. Now he waited at the far end of the bridge, not demanding, not expecting, simply hoping. Eleanor extended her hand. The tension within the ballroom shattered instantly. A smile unlike any Sebastian had ever seen transformed her face. Yes. The single word struck him with greater force than any applause. Yes, Your Grace. Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. Then came thunderous applause. Guests rose to their feet. Musicians smiled openly. Even seasoned aristocrats found themselves moved by the moment. Sebastian slipped the ring onto Eleanor's finger. As he rose, she saw something remarkable in his expression. Relief. Not triumph. Relief. As though he had been carrying a burden for months and had finally been permitted to set it down. For the first time since their marriage, they stood beside one another as equals. Not strangers bound by duty. Not reluctant partners. A husband and wife who had chosen each other. The orchestra resumed playing moments later. Couples returned to dancing. Conversation filled the ballroom once more. Yet nothing felt quite the same. The story that had begun with scandal had become something entirely different. A story of redemption. A story society would discuss for years. As the evening continued, Sebastian and Eleanor shared their first dance. The grand ballroom glowed around them. Her hand rested lightly upon his shoulder. His arm encircled her carefully. The music flowed like a gentle current carrying them through the crowd. You astonished half of London tonight, Eleanor murmured. Only half. A faint smile touched her lips. The other half may still be recovering. I deserve their shock. His tone softened. I spent too many years believing strength meant never admitting fault. Eleanor studied him. And what do you believe now? Sebastian's gaze held hers. I believe strength is admitting fault before it costs you everything. The answer lingered between them. Simple. Honest. Weeks passed. Winter deepened. Snow settled across the Ashford estate in sparkling layers of white. The nursery awaited its smallest resident. The scandal vanished beneath happier news. And as Eleanor's pregnancy advanced, the entire household seemed united in anticipation. Sebastian remained constantly at her side. Not from obligation. From desire. The closer fatherhood approached, the more his priorities transformed. The future no longer revolved around titles or properties. It revolved around family. One snowy evening in early spring, those hopes were finally tested. The summons arrived shortly after midnight. Labor had begun. The manor awakened instantly. Doctors arrived. Servants hurried through corridors. Fireplaces blazed. Candles illuminated every room. Sebastian stood outside the bedchamber feeling more helpless than he had ever felt negotiating treaties, managing estates, or addressing parliament. Hours passed. Each minute felt endless. Every sound from behind the closed door tightened the knot within his chest. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, there existed nothing he could control. Only wait. Only pray. At dawn, a cry echoed through the corridor. Small. Powerful. Perfect. The physician emerged smiling. Congratulations, Your Grace. Sebastian barely heard the rest. His legs carried him toward the room before reason could intervene. When he entered, sunlight was spilling through the curtains. Eleanor rested against pillows, exhausted but radiant. In her arms lay a tiny infant wrapped in blankets. Their son. For several moments Sebastian simply stared. Words abandoned him. The child yawned. A tiny hand emerged from the blankets. Something inside the Duke shattered completely. Every remaining piece of pride. Every lingering barrier. Every fear. Gone. Eleanor smiled gently. Would you like to hold him? Sebastian nodded. He accepted the child with extraordinary care. The infant seemed impossibly small. Impossibly precious. A life entrusted to him. A life created from the very love he had nearly destroyed. His eyes grew suspiciously bright. Eleanor noticed. She said nothing. Neither did he. Some emotions belong beyond language. Months later, when spring had surrendered to summer and summer to winter once more, Ashford Manor stood transformed. Laughter filled corridors once haunted by silence. The nursery glowed each evening. The family that had nearly broken apart had become stronger because of its wounds. One clear winter night, Sebastian and Eleanor stepped outside onto a terrace overlooking the snow-covered grounds. The stars stretched endlessly above them. Their son slept peacefully in Eleanor's arms beneath a warm blanket. The estate glittered beneath moonlight. Everything was still. Everything was peaceful. Sebastian wrapped an arm gently around his wife. For a long time neither spoke. They simply stood together beneath the heavens. At last Eleanor glanced toward him. "Do you ever think about that night in the study?" His expression grew thoughtful. "Yes." "Why?" He looked toward the sleeping child. "Because it reminds me how easily pride can blind a man." A quiet silence followed. Then Sebastian reached into his coat pocket. Eleanor frowned in surprise. He withdrew a familiar folded note. The note that had accompanied the sapphire locket. Understanding slowly dawned across her face. "You?" He nodded. "When I began questioning my own certainty, I wanted you to know someone still believed in you." Emotion filled her eyes. "The locket was from you as well." "Yes." Eleanor laughed softly through sudden tears. After everything that had happened, the final mystery had led back to him. The man who had hurt her. The man who had healed alongside her. The man who now stood beneath the winter stars holding her heart with far greater care than he once had. She leaned against him. Together they gazed across the sleeping estate. Above them, countless stars shimmered against the velvet darkness. Below them, their son dreamed peacefully. And in an age obsessed with appearances, reputation, and judgment, the Duke and Duchess of Ashford discovered a far greater triumph than preserving a title. They had learned to trust the truth of each other's hearts. And that truth changed everything.